Hello, everybody. This is Stephanie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I wanted to start this out by getting us all in a collective space. And so we're going to start with a short meditation. And not sure if all of you know that there was a super flower moon last night. It's over the next, I think, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so, in connecting with the moon, I thought we'd do a meditation around a healing meditation around the moon. So get comfortable, sit back, relax your arms, and close your eyes if you feel comfortable. And if you would like to work with the spirits or your angelic energies, you can call in them for assistance. I call on the spirits, the healing angels, my guardian angel, and the energies of the moon to be present and to connect with me now. Take a few deep breaths. One more. Now picture yourself outdoors, standing by a beautiful infinity pool or lake. It is nighttime, but the night sky is lit up with a magnificent full supermoon. The silver rays of the moon shine all around you, and the waters take on a silver blue glow. As you stand by the water, you see that there are steps leading down into the water. You dip a toe into the calm waters, and you are pleasantly surprised by the warm temperature. You step in, and with each step down, you feel the warm water lapping against your feet, your ankles, your calves. You continue stepping deeper into the silver blue water as it swirls around your thighs, your hips, your torso, your chest. You stop for a moment to stand in the warmth of the healing waters and to admire the magnificence of the full moon shining down on you. The moon seems to be a bit bigger and closer to the earth than you have ever seen it before, and its energies are palpable. You sense that the water around you is providing healing through the silver moonlight, and that your system is being balanced through the energies of the moon. You decide to swim towards the edge, but as you tread water, you don't seem to reach the edge, and you smile as you realize that the pool is indeed infinite. You are reminded of the infinite nature of the universe and of all possibilities and of your own infinite being. You relax, floating on your back, giving thanks to the moon and to the water surrounding you for the healing. You float here for a while, letting all worries and stress just drift away as you slip deeper into relaxation. When you are ready, turn around and walk back towards the steps. As you step out of the water, you feel calm and refreshed. You noticed as you climbed the steps out of the water that your body dried off immediately. You take one final glance at the beauty of the moon thanking it again for the healing you've received. You feel yourself gently returning to your body. When you are ready, open your eyes. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Wow, that's a hard act to follow. Thank you, Stephanie. Although I sort of wished I was still floating in that beautiful warm water. I do feel refreshed and very well present, and really grateful to be in this space with you, Stephanie, and with the team at Reworlding. Thank you all for all that you're doing and creating this space for us to be together. And to everyone here on the line, I wish there was enough time to see and be with all of you, but we are in spirit, especially after that wonderful centering. So thank you. I have the somewhat challenging task of following that, preceding Stephanie's presentation, and creating some context and preamble that may seem a little formulaic, and so I apologize for having to do that. But I wanted to bring people to the frame of community wealth building, so you understand the context of what we're talking about, Stephanie and I, and then to begin the tale of our work together. So thank you for bearing with me. Stephanie has agreed to shepherd the slides. So Stephanie, if you don't mind going to the first slide. So I know some of you have probably heard this term community wealth building, perhaps others have not. And so I just wanted to call that term to mind, that framework. It's very similar to other frames I'm sure people are familiar with: solidarity, economics, well-being, economy, things of that nature. But what community wealth building is, and here on the slide is a more fulsome definition of how we think about community wealth building and how we implement community wealth building. Essentially, it is a way to transform the economy, starting locally, starting in community. It's rooted in broadly held forms of collective and community ownership of the economy that roots wealth in place for the benefit of people living in that place and for the benefit of the planet. It is a means of reclaiming the economy, of returning it to a vehicle that services the needs of people and place, returning it essentially to its roots as economos, which is the Greek, original Greek word for economy, which means of the house or household. So in other words, the economy needs to be brought back to our homes, to be something in service to who we are, to our homes, to our needs, to our benefit. It is not something that is external to us and that is done to us, although of course that is how it is practiced in our current political economic system. But the truth is, we create the economy and we can recreate it and reshape it in a way that is beneficial for all of us. Unfortunately, right now, ownership and control of our economy is concentrated to degrees that we have not seen since before the Great Depression. And in fact, this concentration is getting aggravated under our current circumstances, as we well know, by the likes of people like Jeff Bezos now becoming the world's first trillionaire as a result of Amazon's domination of our economies. So this concentration is increasing in the hands of fewer and fewer people who are extracting wealth and resources from our communities, and in the process destroying our planet and breaking our bodies, and particularly breaking the bodies of Black and Brown people across the globe in service to this behemoth, to this consumer machine. So we need to revolutionize ownership of the economy, so that we're not just tinkering around the edges to band-aid the destructive externalities of this system as it feeds itself, but fundamentally restructure our system so that it not only works in service to community, but actually produces positive outcomes by its natural functioning. Next slide, Stephanie. Thank you. So community wealth building is a way to do that locally. We list on this slide a number of intervention points that drive implementation of community wealth building, where you can begin in your community to start to change the way things are done. And there are many ways to do this, from cooperative ownership to community land trusts, to asset transfers, to participatory budgeting and planning practices in place. And I'm more than happy to share with people and the whole community resources on how this is done and examples. There are many examples, including a number in Scotland and across the UK, but also in the United States. And of course, growing out of a tradition of community liberation and self-sufficiency that is rooted to things like the civil rights movement and Black Power movements and the cooperativist movements in Tanzania under Ujamaa socialism, and the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain and the Emilia-Romagna cooperatives in Italy. So there are deep traditions to these activities, but community wealth building is a way of linking up a lot of these activities in place so that you begin to see a full system connected and transforming the way local economies operate. So next slide, please, Stephanie. In 2013, my organization, the Democracy Collaborative, began working with a cohort of 5 Native American organizations to support them in implementing community wealth building strategies in their own community through developing specifically cooperative enterprises and different forms of community ownership in place. This picture I love, although I know some hate it because they're wearing hair nets and beard nets and others, but that's the full cohort together in the early stages at the Evergreen Cooperatives, which is a network of 3, now 5 employee-owned cooperatives in Cleveland, Ohio, that provide goods and services to local institutions. They're all employee-owned and they're all green. And this is the hydroponic greenhouse that produces lettuce and herbs for the institutions. So next slide, please, Stephanie. So it was a 5-year project and an incredible learning experience, not least for me as one of the lead coordinators on that project, working with some really incredible organizations in Indian country, both rural and urban, and in particular, one of these organizations, Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. The Pine Ridge, if you don't mind staying on that slide for 1 second, Stephanie, I'll just set the scene. The Pine Ridge Reservation is a beautiful and huge geographical space in the middle of South Dakota, around the Badlands, which is a beautiful geographical feature in the American West. And of course, unfortunately, the land has been extracted from the people living there, used for things like leasing out to cattle ranchers and other extractive practices on the land, and leaving very few resources in the control of the hands of the Lakota people who live there. And unfortunately, what you hear about are things like the conditions of poverty. But the truth is, what is happening on the Pine Ridge Reservation is about resilience and self-determination and mutuality and support and community and growth. And that's what you're seeing Thunder Valley really showcasing here. So again, the Learning Action Lab is a 5-year project to work together to develop explicit cooperative projects and community ownership projects in communities across the country. And we began the cohort, and next slide, Stephanie, coming together as a group. And my organization, the Democracy Collaborative, was so excited, and we came with all this expertise and all this information and all these ideas in the framework of community wealth building and theories of political economy and all this stuff. And we were so excited to bring this group together and to share all of this stuff. And about halfway through the first meeting, one of the elders of the group stood up and said to us, this is all well and good, could you please leave the room? Could you please leave the room, and we'll let you know when you can come back. And so, all us well-intentioned folks with our ideas and our slideshows and our expertise, sort of said, "Oh, and we got up and left, and we sat outside the room for a number of hours, realizing that our agenda had been jettisoned, and that we really should have thought this one through. And a number of hours later, we were invited back into the room, and we were said our appreciation was expressed for our expertise and ideas, but that the group needed to really have some time. They felt like they were being doused with a fire hose, and they needed some time to sit with, to process, to contextualize, to think through in their own knowledge, in their own understanding, and to bring their own expertise to bear on the things that we were talking about. It was entirely humbling, powerful, and incredibly necessary moment for the group. And we realized that despite our own best intentions, we were replicating systems of oppression in our process. We were doing to rather than doing with. We weren't listening, we were talking at. And it really, especially for me as part of this, it really was a tipping point moment for me in understanding how important process is in addition to the end goal. The means is such a part of this. And so it set the tone for the rest of our project, which became a real true co-learning and collaborative space, learning from one another and changing and moving. And a huge part of that was meeting Stephanie and working with Stephanie at Thunder Valley, and hearing from Stephanie and the community that what we were calling a new economy was in fact a return to an ancestral way of doing things for the Lakota people, a connection into roots and culture that ran deep through colonization to the present day. And so really learning to step back and learn from that experience and pass it over, as I'm going to do now, to Stephanie, who took the frame that we were talking about, recognized its resonance, and also the need for it to be rooted deeply in the frame of Lakota values and Lakota context and Lakota community. And so I'll turn it over to Stephanie now to really speak deeply about that. And also, Stephanie, it's a real honor to know you and to be in space with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so I'm just going to help us put this all into context. And today, knowing about the supermoon really helped to kind of frame it. And so I got online and I was looking at the news, and the New York Times had posted all these beautiful images that were taken over the last 24 hours. And so I thought I'd share them with you just to kind of set the pace. But this is a moon over Stonehenge. This is, I can't see my thing. You all can read it. North Macedonia. Sydney. How beautiful and big it is. Brazil. And San Diego. So I'm looking forward to more images, and keep your eye out. This really brought back some work that I did long ago. I started to get into astronomy and the study of stars, and really, of course, wanted to know what the Lakota practice and belief was around the stars, and knowing that this symbol is very prominent to us. The symbol is called Kapeni, and it is used to explain our relations to the skies. Above represents the sun, it starts, and where the spirit goes. The below represents the earth, the people, our teepees, our homes. Not to be confused with this popular extinction symbol that is used in global environmental movement. They represent the sun and the earth, prayers moving in between. So where they meet is where our prayers move through. Sky and earth mirroring. What is below is like what is above. Ceremonies, time, Everything was dependent on the stars. Everything was connected, as above, so below. I say all this to explain the ever connection we have to all living things, including our economy. So my work really started at Thunder Valley, as Sarah mentioned. And I start by prefacing that our approach is a transformational approach to building economies. It's first connecting ourselves and our relationships. Often we have found that most do not see themselves in the economy. I didn't see myself in the economy until I was in my 40s. We see ourselves as something separate from that entity. And my connection really started with the work I did with my Lakota sister and friend, Ray. Ray was my partner in crime when we delved into this work. And before we could even begin to, we were charged with putting community wealth building into practice in Pine Ridge. And it just, I read the yellow book that Sarah always talks, that Sarah's referring to back to, this one that's put out by Democracy Collaborative. Read this over and over and over again. It's called Cities Building Community Wealth. And throughout all of it, you'll see my notes on the side and words that stood out and had meaning to us as Lakota people, words that described what we wanted to see in our community. And so Ray and I really dived deep into understanding what all this meant. We were learning together. This is when I saw economy or economics, this is what I pictured. I mean, it was primarily done by, people outside of our communities, by people in power, the decision makers. And I didn't see ourselves in it. But in reality, like Sarah mentioned, the word economy being a Greek word, meaning household management, we are the economy. We create it with our choices, with our assets, with what we place value in. The word economy is, like we said, it's household management, but it starts in our homes. And when I say we place value in it, that's really where we started. We started with Lakota values. We started to look at what we value as Lakota people and how does that fit with economy. So my journey started, like she said, at Thunder Valley. I was charged with developing out the social enterprise program. Like she said, prior to joining, I was completing my master's in social work. And I steered away from economic development. It was scary. I was like, that's for people who know more than me. My focus was women and children and trauma. But I was also an entrepreneur. I was a hustler, I say. I hustled to raise my children and to take care of my family. Having dealt with a lot of trauma, historical trauma in my life, every day was just a struggle. And so when I was charged with the social enterprise program, I really wanted to see how this connected with who I was and who my family was and who my larger family, my Tioshbe was. And so like I said, I read that book, I dove into it, and Ray and I spent a lot of time over the next probably 2 months of really looking at each of our values and how they relate to this. We spent time reflecting. We spoke with staff, relatives, and community members through in-person, informal interviews and causal conversations, asking for their input about the approach. Through the translation process, we were able to gain insight and stories, old stories of how things used to be and how they could be now. We received different ways of understanding, but more importantly, we noticed how open and willing people were to contribute. The translation process was not an individual process at all. It was a communal process with a diverse group of community members. We were able to learn what community wealth meant through a natural process of community development. For Lakota, wealth means to live by our virtues and to live in order to have a happy, well-balanced life. It is not materialistic things, but helping, giving, taking care of one another. Our wealth is measured by our ability to care for our people and to provide a strong foundation for future generations. Excuse me. All economic development, in our opinion, should start this way. It should start through a transformational process of translating and integrating strategies, and in our belief, community wealth building strategies into cultural values and practices. We're not talking about a completely new economic strategy. We're talking about revitalizing our old ways of reciprocity, redistribution, relationships, and responsibility, using contemporary, modern day, underutilized business concepts, the kind that Sarah mentioned earlier, cooperatives and employee ownership, employing the unemployable. We believe community wealth building has the potential to restore and redevelop the wealth of Native communities through a systemic approach involving loyalty to geographic place, local broad-based ownership, recognition and support for the formal and informal businesses currently running across our communities. A lot of times we'll hear relatives talk about there's no money here. There's no money here. There's money moving, a lot of times in informal ways. There's bartering, there's cash flowing. But where is it flowing to? Let's see, where am I? Oop, there we go. So we spent time with each of the drivers that Sarah outlined earlier and understanding the way we see it playing now. We took a look at Democracy Collaborative created the traditional approach, the approach that we see more often now. Then we looked at the community wealth building approach. And that's where we then took it into a Lakota community wealth building approach. And we defined it around our values and our principles. And we spend time understanding the way we see it playing now. So the community wealth process and how it can be restoried, we call it. Storytelling is a huge component of this. So listening to the stories of those people in your community, listening to their culture. Every community has culture, not just indigenous communities. Every community has a history and a culture to it. So listening to those stories and what were the values based in those stories. Using our language has such meaning. One word can mean a whole story. So understanding the language and pulling the language into this. And then of course, connecting all living things. Where does the environment play in this? Some of the things that we've learned a lot. But here's some primary things. We learned that in order to implement a new economic framework, we have to decolonize the concepts. We have to make them our own. We have to understand them as they relate to us. And it's a long process in a sense, because you're decolonizing your own mind about where you're spending and where you're putting value and where you're putting your time. And there's a saying, ignorance is bliss. And sometimes I believe that, because now that we know, we have a huge responsibility and it's overwhelming sometimes. So connecting with people like you is so important, and bringing us together and to remind ourselves. Recognize and include culture. Like I mentioned, culture is that's sometimes one of the holders, one of the pieces that's held back in economic development. And it's also one of the things that can be used to move it forward. So finding those connections with culture, make it a communal process. The economy should not be built on just leaders. It has to be coming from the children, the youth, our elders, asking them what's important. What is it that you want to see here? What do you need? What do you need here? And also engaging through storytelling. There's so many stories that we have about how we took care of each other, not just through the colonization process and the genocide, but prior to that. So engaging in those stories. Another thing that I think is extremely important is developing a community baseline. Many communities aren't aware of exactly what's going on in their community. They don't know how many daycares they have. They don't know how many places are buying large goods off or out of community. A baseline covers everything. It is a collection of all things, not just the physical, but also the spiritual things that are going on. So ceremonies and practices and understanding all of it in one baseline is so important, because that's your map. That starts the map of where you're at right now. And then it helps to move those pieces around. We call it community mapping. The other thing is sharing your knowledge about what you've learned through this process throughout the process. Continually feeding back to the community. This is where we're at. This is what we've found. So this leads to where we're at now. All of this work, it was a personal journey. And after Thunder Valley, when I left Thunder Valley, and I came back home to where I live now, because I missed my grandchildren and I wanted to be near them. And so, but I knew this work was so important. And there were often times where I think many of us suffer from imposter syndrome, where we feel like we're not capable. We're not those men in the black and white picture. How can we do this? How can I know this? But with support from Sarah and from Democracy Collaborative, and then meeting other people, I think Robert Wanalo is on this call, from Kenya, learning stories about their struggles and their process just only continues to reiterate to me that I may not know all of the details of stock trading and all of this, but what I do know is community. What I do know is the human connection. What I do know is that I am part of the economy. I am the economy, and my choices and my decisions they contribute. And me as a Lakota woman, and my belief in seeing the connection through all things, and my power, my spirituality and the strength I gained from that is part of this process, and is extremely important for everyone to see themselves as part of that. And I also really believe that we need to start from that place of inner transformation. So really mindfulness practices around this. We've started a nonprofit and it's called Seven Fires. And the name came out of a dream of one of our board members. We are 7 Native women from different tribes and different disciplines. We all work in different disciplines, but we came together to create this nonprofit in order to support Indigenous communities wanting to build community wealth, and using this framework as a way to begin that process. Currently, a lot of Native communities, pardon me, are they're doing a lot of off-site investments. And that's wonderful. The money does come back and it helps to provide social services, but it doesn't address the immediate needs. And one of the things that we found is in those immediate needs, Ray and I realized that most of the time it was women, and it was Indigenous Native women who were spending the money and bringing the money in. And so, but they didn't feel empowered. They didn't feel like they had a voice or that they could make a change. And so we've created this nonprofit One, to support the expansion of community wealth building knowledge, but also we're creating a fellowship that provides a much more personal, transformational growth opportunity for Indigenous women to take the lead, to see themselves in the economy, no matter where they're at. If they're at a mid-level, position, working in a tribal college, they have an opportunity to shift the economy. They have ways, and we will help guide that, while also uplifting and empowering them. I wanted to share with you a few things, how we're doing this. Native people are extremely visual. We love visuals. And we have an artist who's helping us design our work. And this is one of the pieces that they created on the outset based on all of our notes behind here, and the thoughts and the ideas and the experiences we've had. And they really did see it from a human perspective, from a living perspective. And each of these things each of the drivers are a part of a larger human living entity. And so this slide is each of our drivers that they've created some iconography around. And ironically, when I see it, it isn't just Native North American. It seems to fit with a lot of Indigenous populations around the world. And it just so happened to come out that way. So it's a beautiful thing. The next slide I'm going to show you is we talk a lot about our current economy. This image reflects that. A sick economy where resources are leaking out, while classic economic principles and common practices that are evident in our communities today, such as big industry and natural resource development, mining, manufacturing, and tribal-owned enterprises, they've benefited some tribes, but they haven't benefited all of them. It's about the leaky economy, the spending that's going on outside the community with rates as high as 94%. In addition, there's a gap between the decision makers and the community members. Tribal governments often fail to include entrepreneurship in their strategies and sometimes put up barriers to independent businesses. We believe the community wealth building model is designed for broader community knowledge, building, investment, ownership. And this is our image after. So after community wealth building practices have been translated by that tribe, by their culture, there's an opportunity for healing, for unified voices, and a unified movement to a system that supports all things. Our hope is to roll out programming to support Indigenous communities by fall, supporting our leaders with a renewed vision of what economy could look like. And before I lose my voice, I'm going to stop here and open it up for questions or discussion. I'll pass it back to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Sarah. That was just so fascinating and such a lovely story, and so well kind of explored. Really appreciate that. I just wanted to, for those of us who some of us are very quick with questions and have them just pop into our heads or have been burning with them. Others of us can take longer and maybe slower. I see you, Nancy. bouncy. Could you hold that just for 30 seconds, a minute? And we could just take a little breath. Whew. And maybe move to somewhere where it's good for you to think and or ponder. So for me, I would close my eyes and kind of get back in touch with my breathing, but really do what works for you. But just let the kind of what's been said flow through your mind, and maybe some questions or observations will come. Thank you all. I'm aware that I could feel a kind of sense of real excitement and inspiration just coming up that I wasn't really aware of. Just whew. Lovely stuff. So if you can use the reactions button at the bottom to stick your hand up, fantastic, because I can't see everybody because we've got 2 screens. I'll try and make sure that the questions get asked in the right order. Thank you. So Nancy, go.
I think one of the questions I had, without obviously studying the entire process, and without looking at the process, there must be something in the kind of pre-work to discern true need versus the indoctrinated need, if you're getting what I'm trying to say here, because there's so much in our culture now, both in everything that's out there. Unless you've lived on an island in the middle of nowhere and had no contact with anyone anywhere, there is a lot of media influence. There's a lot of, teaching in schools that isn't complete. There's a lot missing. So I guess when you go into, my experiences, when you go into these processes, you need to step in slowly to weave the fabric of the community, as well as not just the storytelling of the wrongs, but also the rights, and also the then finding that. So I guess my question with the kids is that, starting with the kids, we like to think that kids are innocent and and all of that, but really they've also had a lot of, since since they were born, the parents, and from generation unto generation, things are passed down. And so what we pass to our children, sometimes we don't know. We are not aware. And sometimes we're just utterly ignorant ourselves. So I don't know if I'm expressing the question right, but is there a process to clear first?
I can answer that best as I can. I completely understand what you're saying, Nancy. And I think that's why our first approach was going back to our traditional values. It's hard to stray when you're talking about cultural values and traditional meaning to those values. It's difficult to stray way far like we do now. It's going back to basics, and not just values, but principles. What is it that we hold true? What is it that's most important to us? And you're right. I mean, this is the decolonizing process. This is that process of undoing, and really pushing them to go further. No, dig deeper, keep going, and that's why it's difficult too with funders, getting them to understand that this is a process that takes time, and we need the funding to do that, to bring people together, to build relationship, to learn those stories. Sometimes elders, when our elders speak, sometimes it can be 8 hours. You don't move, you listen. So I hope that somewhat can answer that process.
Sarah, did you have a response to that too?
Yeah, and I just want to highlight the decolonization point, because I think the term decolonization I think sometimes people think, well, in the context of indigenous people or whatever, but in fact, we've all been colonized as well. And not to diminish the true horror of the active colonization of indigenous people and others, but all of our minds have been colonized, and I will say intentionally so. I think, again, there's this sense, and as we remove ourselves from the economy, that we don't recognize it's not just something that happened, just like the econo speak of the free market. Well, there is no free market. The market is a construction. It's something that we've created. So there's this sense of sort of inertness, right? That we are removed from this, that it's almost like a force, but that's bollocks. I mean, excuse my language, but so the decolonization process is something for all of us to do, and we're fighting an uphill battle because it is intentional, and there is a power structure that perpetuates it, and there is a narrative that continues to colonize us in this system. So it's hard work, and as Stephanie said, it takes time. And at some point, I'd like to address this time issue, because we had a conversation in our prep call about time is a colonial idea, and yet we also have a breakdown of ecosystems and climate ticking at us. So on the one hand, it's a colonial idea, and we have to deconstruct it. And part of that is prioritizing and valuing the processes that we need to do to make it better, and not falling prey to the urgency argument that perpetuates the same kind of oppressive systems that we've been in all along. So there's so much in this, and it's not easy. I won't say, Nancy, that this is an easy response to your question, but we have to do the hard work. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin, you are next.
My question really follows on really well from what Sarah just said. And it's about the role of education and learning. One of the problems we have is that by the time we've reached adulthood, our kind of like culture and values have been colonized. And getting people out of that, for instance, to think about forming their own cooperatives as opposed to working for somebody else, is a big mind shift. And I was interested, Stephanie mentioned the role of the tribal college in their situation, and it would be nice to hear a little bit more about the role that plays. And I'm thinking back, Sarah mentioned the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, and they were started by a priest in 1943. The first thing he did was set up a college, and they only created their first enterprise in 1956, because he had to really get them to think about a whole different set of values and approaches and so on. So I just want to ask both Stephanie and Sarah and for any comments on that.
I can speak to the tribal college piece. So, our education systems are colonized, and it's been, I think it's the people within the tribal colleges is finding someone within them to be at the table. We haven't had the success or the success yet of being able to bring this approach into a classroom necessarily, because academia and the big white towers want research. And as people in community and community practitioners, we don't have time. I mean, we're trying to save a planet, and so what we have found success in is extensions. So they call them extensions here in America. The large colleges have extension offices that work within the community, and we've had 2 extensions offices reach out to us and say, we're interested. What is this? We want to share this. And so that has opened us up to being able to share this information with community practitioners in rural communities across the country. So there's interest there. It hasn't reached yet the tribal college at a higher level. And that's okay. That just means that we have to continue to inform individuals and to breach that wall through our students, and share it that way. I wish there was a better answer. But I do think talking about economy when you're young, I've started it with my grandson at 4 years old. When he loves farming, we talk about it through agriculture. We talk about, when he sees I say, what's that? He says, a crop sprayer. I say, who makes that? He says, capitalists. So, there's little things we can do.
I love that tale, Stephanie. And I just, Martin, I don't want to say too much more because I love that tale, but I absolutely agree. Education is key. And to Stephanie's point, though, it's not just formal education, although shameless plug, we at the Democracy Collaborative we're developing a curricula for business schools and economic schools and stuff to start to change that. And you're seeing things like, for example, at the University of Glasgow, they have just announced a chair of well-being economics to actually start teaching economics in a different way. So you're starting to see some shift at the sort of formal educational level, and that is truly important, but there's so much to be done at the informal level. And I will say that I think what's so powerful for this generation coming up and next generation is to show by doing. It's just to be able to say, look at what's happening in this community. Look at what this community is doing. Look how different it is and that it feels, and that the people in that place are more complete. And so I think that is also the real form of learning that will start to make a difference, especially, and I hate to say it, because in this era, people realize that it's not working for them, right? It's working for some people, but it's certainly not working for most of us. And so they're open, they're looking, they're seeing, and I think that's really powerful.
Lovely, thank you. Jaya, you were next.
Okay. Yeah, well, speaking about this, we have 500 companies who organize almost all of our lives in the world. And if you see in Wikipedia, it's like they're from all nations, let's say, and these are in an extreme international global competition. So my question is, how do you see the influence of the monetary organizational tool, or money means, the financial systems are already which we as humanity use since 5,000 to 6,000 years on our economy? Means, since we are the economy, also on each human on Earth, with its inherent constraints of a first gradual, then faster and faster concentration of these means. They have a life of its own. They develop this all the time. So how do you see that it is almost impossible to change humans' nature, as we are all under such circumstances which the monetary system imposes on us? And the third question is, how do you see the fact that we can shift the monetary world system onto prepared global networking now for the first time in human history, in order to reorganize, restructure, rebuild, or reworld our global community and our natural world? So these are three questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jaya. Stephanie has passed to me, although I do think we should use this as an example, because this is a very nuts and boltsy capital E economy question that I think people like myself and others may have imposter syndrome or feel intimidated about answering. So I'm just gonna say that, because I think that is part of the problem with financialization, and the fact that financialization and the financialized global economy controls the world, because it's intentionally, and I've said this before, but it's intentionally meant to exclude people, to intimidate people, to be over our heads, to be opaque, and they've done a very good job of that. And in fact, it is opaque. A lot of these financialized tools are incredibly complex and incredibly impossible to navigate and see where they begin and end. And there's a reason for that. So that said, I am not an expert in these things. So I know many people who are, and there's a lot of really exciting thinking happening in the modern monetary theory movement. Places like Positive Money, someone mentioned in the chat, Rethinking Economics, are doing a lot of thinking around our monetary system and the need to change it. But the truth is, right now, our neoliberal economic system is a monetized, financialized system. It is a financialized system that doesn't actually exist in place any longer. And that is the behemoth that we're up against. And when we talk about, a concentrated wealth and concentrated power, that is what that is. And so we do need to deconstruct that. And so it is going to require not only national level regulation and policy frameworks to rein that in, but also supranational and global efforts to do that. And certainly the systems that we have right now at a supranational and global level are not only woefully insufficient, but are actively propping up the financialized monetary system as it is. So I think the way I'm going to answer your question without being an expert in monetary theory or policy is that we need to be able to do two things at once. We need to be able to do this really hard work at the ground that really shows what's possible and change minds, but we also need to connect that into larger movements and larger scale efforts that really push to change and take down the existing infrastructure that props up these systems. So it's both and. We can't just do one. We certainly can't just do the sort of tearing down the system without building the new at the ground level. So we have to do both at the same time. So that's how I'll answer that.
Can I add something or ask?
Sure.
Yeah, because this is the third question was we have the opportunity now to prepare the global networking in a way that we can make a world currency reform and to shift it from the monetary system, that we don't use monetary means anymore, because as long as we use monetary means, these 500 companies, including the military and defense apparatus, are in an extreme competition. And with this, and that's the situation for the rich as for the poor, we can't fight against the climate catastrophe and ecological breakdown, or against the self-annihilation. And this is we have to make this clear to all, to the rich and to the companies and to the poor, that we only if this great shift succeeds, then we can fight against this the processes which threatens our lives and living world.
Thank you. Yeah. So I move on to Robert. Yeah, thank you. Robert, you may have questions, but I know that you also have a huge amount of experience in this area, which people will be interested to hear a little bit about.
Hello all, thank you. Mine is actually just a comment because of what a way to, unless my math is wrong, to begin my second half of this year by attending this event. So I've really enjoyed it so much. Both Sarah and Stephanie are my good friends. So it's lovely to see both of you together presenting here. But for me, one thing that just became particularly clear through this presentation is, Kate Raworth's principle in the donut economics about change the goal. And it first, in the way you shared it, Sarah, around process. And I just love how you've described about beginning with a process of inquiry and engagement that starts where the community and place is. And really, at that same point, really starting from there complements it with a sense of refusal. That starting from there means that you're starting from below, but you're really beginning from a place of honoring and starting from there and letting the flourish and inquiry and growth proceed from there. And so I really like that when you change the goal of how we perceive economics and how we perceive economics in place and with community, then it seems to have a different shape than when I'm looking at it from a fairly detached place. And so I've really enjoyed just, hearing both of you describe that. And also with just the whole body of community wealth building being such a great body of ideas of really bringing the idea of economy back closer to home and closer into community and place, and how the Lakota translation just is a whole experience of really bringing it into the household, like it's now closer home, but then a step further back into the household, and then now really begin to explore how to proceed from there. So I've just loved experiencing that and listening to both of you describe it. So as always, very enriched. So thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
I'll add, Robert, thank you so much. And it's always fun to talk with Robert because we always end up on the same page. We're both struggling with the same thing, and it's just good to hear from someone else who's in the work. But one of the things he talks about, how we convey it is, we'll say to a room, to a room of Native people, what we do during the day is different than what we do at night. And everyone shakes their head because they know that at home is your decolonized mind, and how we interact, how we build relationship, how we live. And then there's this colonized practice when we leave the house. And so it's helping them to understand that we're aware that there's two lives lived. Now, which way, and it's helping to begin that conversation and about how they play off of each other. And it's an easier way to understand economy too in your life. So it's just a start. It's that start of it. So thank you, Robert.
Wonderful to see you, Robert, and I'm so glad of this connection. I'll just to call out my friends and colleagues at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. That's how Robert and I connected, and that's how we've sort of built our relationship. So I'll just say that that's a wonderful network to get involved with, to feel support and get resources and so forth if you're interested in these ideas. So I'll just put that out there. Again, another plug, but it's a great group to be a part of.
Thank you. Ada, do you have a question?
Oh, I mean, I guess it might be kind of a mix of things or a comment, and I apologize if I don't know if folks touched on it, but I think there's been some mentions of intentionality of why the economy is the way it is, and I think it's, especially if we're talking about indigenous and animist frameworks for economy, we really need to talk about what is the foundation of reality that we're speaking from. And I think one of our tendencies as people, when we talk about these things, when we see trees as life and other beings as life, which is obviously part of an animist cosmology of things, we, I think, tend to dissociate and not recognize things we don't like are also alive. And now there's this concept called Wetiko in the Algonquin people of Turtle Island, or you might call it Wendigo. And it means a cannibal spirit that replicates itself. Right, so it's like a mind virus that transplants from person to person. And I think when we talk about intentionality, we have to be very careful, because when this is like, I don't really know a lot about complex things, because my mind's not that complex, but I have I think a decent understanding why things are complex, which is a different thing. And inside of that, I think it's very important for us when we recognize that all things are beings and all beings are interrelated. That means the market is an organism. And to inscribe intentionality within the marketplace and what it's doing to certain groups of people is actually quite a conceptually dangerous game if we actually look at how the market works as an organism. So I really want to point that out, because I think when we're, especially if we're talking about emergence, complexity, and atomism, because when we ascribe that intentionality to a group of people, we create a narrative that we don't recognize. We are actually preventing from Wetiko, or whatever you want to call it, the accountable spirit, to actually be seen for what it is. Because the market is not necessarily by anybody's intention. If you actually follow the origination of it, the market is emergent. And the emergent being itself is what you might call disastrous to us. So emergence itself is also not positive. We have to realize that our culture is fucked because of emergence. Like, emergence itself is what's fucking us over. So the solution is to be emergent back, but we have to recognize that means that, like, if we're going to see ourselves as the economy and it's a live thing, well, the economy that is there is also an alive being. And I think that conceptual framework of what reality are we going to stand this, put this conversation on, is actually the really important decolonial conversation we need to be having right now. Because it's actually about the framework and cosmology about how we see the world. And when we have that framework and cosmology that is shared by most indigenous people, well, I'm going to say all, but, you know, by all indigenous peoples of the world at their foundation, then you actually have a premise. But if you have a premise that the only thing alive are what is the good things, you're not really going to get there, is my, my critique. It might sound harsh, but I'm just trying to be very direct about how I think about that, because I think we fall into this trap a lot, especially when we're talking in activist spaces, that we try to find a human being, and it's actually anthropocentrism, is that we think we are the problem and we are the cause. It's not. That's actually anthropocentric modern Westernist thinking. So we need to really shift that paradigm and say, no, actually spirits, demons, quote unquote, or diamonds, because nothing is totally evil, but they're all alive. The market is alive. The internet is alive. We're inside of a live being. And the thing that we're alive, inside of and alive doesn't care about us necessarily. Like, I don't care about a cell in my organ. Like, I don't care about a cell, right? Like, literally, if a cell dies in my body, it gets replaced. So the organism that we're a part of doesn't necessarily care about the micro individual beings inside of it. And this is also something really important. So I think when we're saying we are the economy, also, it's like kind of like, but yes, but we're also not the economy. The economy is its own being. I think it's very, very important framing. Yeah.
Can we let Stephanie and Sarah respond?
Sure.
Stephanie, did you want to go? Yeah, go first.
It's a lot to think about. It's ironic that you say this, because this morning when I was pulling slides together, that idea of all living things, it hit me, and it was like, some would say, it's prefaced a lot of times in Native spirituality in a good way, a positive way, but it's anything. It's anything. And sometimes it's seen as negative when it could be positive. That it could be seen as something destructive, but it could also, but in its essence, it's really meant to be there. And so you give me a lot to think about, because that's being in relationship with it. What you're saying is a deeper sense of being in relationship with it, and not excluding it.
Yeah, and if I'm kind of excited, but quickly, it's like a coyote or a trickster spirit, right?
Yes.
Essentially, our market is a trickster spirit that is not being seen. So every time we don't recognize it's a trickster, we trick ourselves. And
yes.
I think that's the difference between Wetiko and the trickster. The trickster actually belongs, or it belongs in a way you enjoy. Mm-hmm. You're like, you fucking got me again. Wetiko is running the whole show, and you're like, you don't even remember that they're there anymore. This is like, the person is completely possessed, and they don't realize. But the trickster, the person's like, fuck. the trickster got me again. And I think that's the difference of cosmology that we really need to, I think, yeah, animist indigenous people in general, we need to actually like kind of not water down that cosmology, I think, for Western, my perspective. And of course, I'm a Western and speaking from both contexts, you know. But thank you.
I love that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think it's really important and an added layer of depth. And I'll just say that I think the framing of the natural world is really important, because if you study the natural world, in fact, you understand that you can't have growth without death, right? So there you need to be able to have the death and both sides, right? So you need, and to expand on your analogy of the cell, I mean, you need to be able to cut out cancers, right? So we need to be able to acknowledge that cancers exist, and then we need to also be able to hold the tension. I mean, I think one of the problems, and you brought up sort of left spaces, is an aversion from conflict, and I think we have to be able to hold conflict and learn from it and allow it and recognize that it's the both and, right? And it's the good and the bad, and we need to live in that. So I really appreciate you bringing that to this.
Well, I would jump in really, really quick and say even cancer, right? This is actually, cancer itself is a second liver for the body, as I understand. So it's what develops when the body cannot handle its own toxicity anymore, and the liver cannot process, so it develops a secondary organism, an organ, by proxy to handle that. So in and of itself, if you cut out the cancer, the cancer is again a trickster. I think this is the one I'm talking about. It's like the indigenous medicine way of saying, it's like, oh, there's a trickster, there's a trickster. And if you keep cutting out the trickster's like, well, okay, well, I'm gonna sneak back in through another hole. So I don't know, like so I'm just trying to put it out this like, let's shifting the perception of the body, and all these things I think are very, very important, personally.
Bit of the trickster in you yourself, Tada.
Oh yeah, I'm totally a Cancer. I'm messing up.
Let's pass on to Justin. I think our speakers have lined themselves up very well.
Yeah, lovely. Really, that was wonderful. Thank you both, especially the story of you working together and of coming with the answer, and receiving the fact that you didn't have the answer, but you had stuff to give. And for us all, just like we think we have the answer and we don't, none of us have the answer, but we have an openness and we have stories. And I guess the power of stories, and I think Tada that was part of what I got from that, but just they're really powerful. And in economics, in macroeconomics, this story that the rest of us don't understand it is a powerful story to make us powerless, that it is somebody else who knows. And then the stories of future trading and companies being really wealthy because people think it's going in some direction. So storytelling is absolutely central to that weird beast that we believe is called the economy, and we allow to tumble over everything. But I guess I really love what Robert said about starting from community in place and from a sense of refusal, if I heard you right, Robert. So a kind of refusal of the system as is. And I just wanted to ask about storytelling, because the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is great, and Catherine Trebek's work is fantastic. I mean, she's up here in Scotland, and yet the Scottish government's taken it on as a kind of gloss on top of an economic growth model that is all about pushing oil and gas and pushing for growth and all the rest of it. So it has a kind of, so there's storytelling which can be used against us, that kind of makes things look sweet when actually there's a real bitter kind of extraction going on underneath. And there's storytelling that can be used to open up the spaces. So I guess my question was just about when you're telling, I loved your, I won't go too far. I love too much. It's just the way that when you're storytelling, when you're looking at the story of community, the community mapping, and you're sharing about the process, are you sharing about the process of that kind of larger story that's happening around, of how others are extracting from the community? Or are you just sharing the stories of how you can build? Are you sharing both? And if so, how do you share those two sides? Because that sounded really important.
Definitely sharing both. Because the impact on our communities has been largely based on external input, and oftentimes, and there have been times when we've done it where many never saw, they knew the personal trauma based on extraction and genocide, but they didn't know the impact necessarily that it continues to have. on our own minds and our mindset. And one of the beautiful things that comes out of that mapping as well is relationships that they didn't recognize they had, that they do have. And oftentimes it is with external partners. And they never understood, you know, when these partners are asking, what can I do for you? They didn't know what to say. So when we map, there's moments of, oh, I never thought I could ask them for that. We have one community who was deep in partnerships, deep, had done this beautiful job of building partnerships and relationship, but didn't know what to do with it. And that was insurmountable for them. The rest just kind of played together and you know, came together for them. But I think too, the other thing is the external implications can also bring awareness about immediate action that needs to happen. You know, one of the things we noticed was like our tribe does procurement off of, you know, Office Max or one of these office supply businesses, and they're all doing it individually. And it's like, I mean, there's so much money that's spent. And, you know, when I said, can you imagine 10%, just asking the tribe that spends over, you know, 30 million a year on office supplies and equipment. Imagine if you ask them for 10% of that back to be purchased within the community. And they would say, well, we don't have anyone. And it's like, okay, well, let's find someone. You know, let's work on that. That mapping exercise is probably the best place to start to see your potential, to identify your assets, to see where the gaps are. You know, it has a lot of uses. I hope that explains some of what you were asking.
And I think the mapping is a very visual way to recognize the extraction as well, because in identifying the gaps, you can ask the question of why don't we have that, you know, and so I think that is part of the storytelling, both and, right, the good and the bad, and I think that's really powerful. I mean, I think also, Justin, your earlier point, and Tina put it in the chat, sort of a bigger question of co-optation, and I think this is it's another one of these tensions that we have to hold. The more it's almost like you become a victim of your own success. I mean, we're seeing this in the use of the term community wealth building as well. And, you know, community wealth building is not just a way, you know, to do a little local purchasing and not actually fundamentally question and restructure the you know, foundations of your local economy and the institutions within it, right? And so this is something we talk about a lot, right? Because there are gains in some ways to the Scottish government talking about well-being economics. There's a lot of positivity that it's an open door, and it's an open door we need to push on, and we need to push on it with gumption and enthusiasm and so forth. And it's going to get watered down, and there's going to be bad business practices happening behind it. And so we just need to keep fighting and saying, okay, great, so good, and look what can actually be done when you do it in a real way, and look what that does for local communities, and uphold those really transformative and radical practices and models. And just, I mean, it's a struggle. I don't have an easy answer, and it's one we grapple with every day in the work that we do. Yeah, so I'd welcome collective thinking on this as well. And Justin, we'll have follow-up conversation, no doubt.
Just a quick one on that one, Sarah, though. I call it the hypocrisy theory of change. You get the powerful to say what they don't really mean, and then you really hold them to it.
Yeah.
So you don't, because they're being hypocritical, doesn't make it not a useful move. It's a really useful move as long as you keep pushing at that point.
And
So,
in
yeah.
fact, in some ways, it's almost more useful because I don't want to say that, but it's almost like, okay, well, now actually practice what you preach. And we can show that you're not, as a matter of fact, but you said it. So now we're going to use that. So it's a challenge and it's a tool, and we need to use it.
It's about time to wrap up. Unfortunately, this has been so interesting. And I think what I'm taking away is a real sense of excitement about, so if we can reclaim the economy, and you guys have shown so well how we start doing that, maybe we can reclaim politics as well, and working together with communities that are looking at decision making and how we can reclaim politics for ourselves, for ordinary people, together with projects which are reclaiming the economy. Just feels like it's quite a powerful combination, and I feel really excited about where our conversations might go next. So Stephanie and Sarah, I want to say thank you very, very, very much. I think if there's big questions from people, and maybe we can stay on the line for 5 more minutes, but if people need to go, we really like to keep our time boundaries how we've set them. I know. So I guess I don't want to say goodbye, and then stick around. And Stephanie and Sarah have time, then maybe they can speak to you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Hi.
Bye bye. Do open your mics and say bye as well.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
I just put a link in there about a study that was done and still is ongoing, but for 10 years, the Mi'kmaqi community has been working with government here. And they are developing curricula, they are developing other things. So this is an ongoing project, and they have all done the research. I'm all about not reinventing the wheel when you don't have to, but sometimes you have to reinvent the wheel. That, you know, again, processes always are ongoing, and we're all in it, and we're all trying to figure it out. But Nova Scotia has a lot of community and a lot of identity with community and cross community, and we are small enough, thankfully, to be able to be somewhat self-contained and to have these conversations and to have these seeds. And of course, we're affected by everything out there too. So we're not devoid of that. Anyway, bye.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye-bye.
I'm happy to stay on just a few minutes if
Yeah, me
anybody.
too.
We usually don't want to go here.
Yeah, we all have that was lovely. That was so good. Thank you so much.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
just-
enjoyed it. I hope others did.
Yeah.
You always want to do more, you know?
Yeah. Oh, just change the world quickly for us, just in one talk.
Go out and stand in front of the moon tonight.
Yes.
Prayer.
Yeah. Time to get out.
We'll all
Thank you so much.
connect.
Great. Bye
Yeah.
now. Ciao.
All right.
Bye,
See you.
Justin.
Bye, lovely
Bye,
people.
Justin.
Hope
Thank
to
you.
Another session.
We've had cloudy skies here in Brussels for days on end, and it's finally cleared. So I'm hoping I'll finally get to see the moon tonight.
Yes. Yes.
Lovely.
All right.
I just had a quick question on the Slack. I think the link to the Heart Politics Slack or something was shared yesterday. Could you all?
Apparently, invite people. It runs out after 15 days. I hadn't spotted, but I have to share it for you here.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thanks for finding
But
that.
that's the new link. Bye-bye, Stephanie.
Are you heading out, Stephanie? Thank you. Lovely to be in space with you.
See you soon.
Thank you
Oh,
so
you're on
much.
mute, Stephanie.
Nice
Oh,
to
there
see
she
you
goes.
all.
Robert, so glad you could join. Let's catch up soon.
For sure, let's do that.
Yeah, and videos, Nina. Bye-bye, Robert. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
We're going to put videos up like as soon as we can. We're really small.